Welcome to We're at the Age from Voice St. Louis.
We're at the age to make peace with death. On this week's episode, we chat with Dr. Maurya Cockrell, who's a death doula. And if you're like me, you're asking yourself, what on earth is that? We're going to answer that question and get into misconceptions about death doulas, navigating grief, and creative ways to remember loved ones. Maurya has some powerful insights on things we can be thinking about for ourselves or our family members, so stay tuned. Melody, today we are talking about something a little bit scary. We're talking about death.
Oh my goodness, that is scary. When we had my death party with my family, which if you don't know about the death party, go back and listen to the first episode. But when I brought up with my family, like, hey, let's talk about end of life wishes and all of these kinds of things, my brother responded and he was like, hey, that's actually kind of scary. Like, that scares me. I don't want to think about that. And I think that's an attitude that a lot of people have, whether you're young or old. It's something that you don't want to think about. It's something that you don't want to have to process. And so it's one of those things that we kind of put off as far as having a conversation or really coming to terms with it. So we have with us today Maurya, and she is a death doula. And she is going to help us start to have these conversations. So welcome in, Maurya.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
And Maurya, can you tell us a little bit about you and your background? You're a doctor, so we've kind of got quite a few credentials going on. So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm Dr. Maurya D. Cockrell. I'm the founder of We Speak Healthcare, so where I offer elder speak training, deaf doula services, and also legacy planning. So a little bit about me is that I started kind of this deaf doula work a little informally, just with my own personal experience with grief and loss growing up. And then throughout my professional career, I was exposed to doing some end-of-life work, working in spiritual care with medical ethics, some great volunteer experience, being with people as they were actively transitioning, and then some faculty work with IAP Career College over their deaf doula program. So really kind of started using the title officially a little over 5 years ago, but it just seemed like it was part of my natural life path to be involved with this work.
So what exactly is a death doula?
So a deaf doula is a non-medical professional that can offer educational, emotional support for those who are either actively transitioning, who want to plan in advance for their transition, or they can help families kind of navigate grief and loss. So it's important to kind of know that there aren't medical services provided. We're part of the care team working with like hospice, palliative care, and medical professionals, and also legal professionals. But we're there kind of spending that devoted time with those loved ones.
Awesome. So kind of to tie into that, so if somebody's working with hospice, is that somewhere they would get a death doula, or where would like somebody actually find a death doula? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a lot of hospice organizations that are starting to partner with deaf doulas, either contracting or having them as, volunteers, just because the medical staff cannot spend all the time. They wish they could with those patients who are actively transitioning. So you could very well see a deaf doula with a hospice organization, but also family members can kind of contact a deaf doula on their own and kind of have that companion come in to the hospice organization and sit with their loved one, while they are transitioning. So it really just depends, but I'm so excited with the awareness of deaf doulas that there is an increase of organizations partnering with us.
Very cool. What got you interested in this kind of work, Maurya?
Like I said, just my background, unfortunately, growing up, I was around loss a lot with my grandparents, with aunts and uncles, and even classmates. And that always stood with me, like seeing how my own family and friends kind of just navigated grief and loss, losing a grandmother to cancer and then losing a grandmother sudden and traumatically. I was able to see just competitive grief, like what hurts more, when you're preparing for it, when you see your loved one suffering versus when someone is kind of just snatched away from you. So that stayed with me. And I wouldn't say I was always super comfortable, but end of life, going with those losses back to back, even myself had to go to a spiritual advisor to kind of sit with me, help me navigate that anxiety and those feelings. And I think deep down that always sat with me, like what could I do to help others that were kind of going through those same experiences? And like I said, professionally, working in project management, I ended up working in the spiritual care department where some of my projects were looking at like the time spent per type of death, the support that we gave to staff members who are working in those units where they had patients who transition, looking over medical ethics cases, helping family members kind of navigate those difficult conversations. So it's kind of, a part of me. And then I remember a legacy workshop, and I'm thinking more of like the HR hat and thinking about like your resume and the legacy at work. We ended the workshop by writing our own obituaries. And so like all those little experiences kind of came together. And when I learned of this formal term, death doula, I looked at the curriculum with IAP Career College. I looked at my past experience. I'm like, this is something that I've been doing in different ways all along. And so formally kind of took on that title, started teaching other death doula students, and then really embraced it. Started doing more workshops on one-on-one consultations and things like that.
Tickets are on sale right now for Voice's first ever fashion show for older adults and people with disabilities. The Timeless Elegance fashion show is going to be on April 26th. And let me tell you, folks, tickets are going to sell out for this one. Be sure that you're a part of the great time that we're going to have on April 26th in St. Louis by going to voicestl.org/fashion show to get your tickets and more information. And by the way, guys, this is a brunch thing. No need to stay up all night for this event. So you're going to love it. voicestl.org/fashion show. So what are some misconceptions that people have about death doulas? I imagine there are a lot. What are some that you run into quite a bit?
First, people are really afraid. I feel like when I say I'm a death doula, I kind of get like a strange reaction. People tense up because I guess it can sound like a little bit morbid or a little creepy. So first, for me to even understand the misconception, someone has to kind of be willing to talk to me about it.
Yeah.
So fear is the first thing. But a lot of times people think that they can only work with a death doula if they are actively transitioning. And, that is a perfectly fine time to bring in a death doula, but it's great to be proactive. I feel like if you plan in advance, then, you're less likely to stress and worry over the minor details. And also it can give comfort, to your family and friends as well. So thinking that, they have to be in that process, maybe have a terminal diagnosis and things like that. Another misconception is that like a death doula will guide you on like what your end of life wishes should be. And a death doula is supposed to respect your wishes, actively listen to what it is that you want, advocate for you, whether it's to medical professionals or to your family and friends, but they should definitely put their client first. And any other misconceptions could be that we all offer the same services. I know some death doulas that love the actual funeral planning and talking to you about like your options of like a natural burial or cremation and things like that. Some have more of a legal background and love to talk to you about your living will and advance directives. And others can be like myself, like I love focusing on legacy and life reviews and making sure that you remember it the way that you want to be, that you have this documented, that you have like a legacy projects and things that your family and friends and community can remember you by, and also offering like obituary writing and design and things like that. But there's so many different aspects of end of life planning, preparation. So that's another misconception that we all kind of do the same thing.
I love the idea you put at the beginning of that, where you're not scary. Just in case anybody's wondering, Maurya is not wearing a Grim Reaper outfit. She does not have that sickle. I don't think she's coming after anybody, but I can definitely see where people would be afraid, and that misconception of, well, I have to be dying to use this. I think that was a misconception that I had, and gosh, I've known you for 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
So that's really cool to know, because I think that there's so much benefit in doing a lot of that early. Like even the legacy planning piece of it, how we want to be remembered. I mean, that's something that we're at the age that we can do.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a really great thing.
Yeah, definitely. And you kind of touched on some different types of things that different death doulas will do. So what are some things that people should consider when thinking about getting in contact with a death doula?
I would say kind of do an assessment to see where those gaps are. So if you are a person that's kind of planning your own future, it might be that you are a solo ager. So you know you need to have this information documented. You need to have a plan. You need to maybe contact someone in your community on where they can find your wishes and things like that. It could be, a family who's planning for the loss of a parent. So navigating those conversations, maybe it's siblings arguing, so they might bring in a death doula to help mediate and kind of facilitate that conversation to make sure, their parents' wishes are honored. But also just thinking about just different organizations. Like I love coming in and helping those who are maybe clinical professionals that deal with end of life all day, every day, but maybe the organization is realizing that their staff members need time to process and prepare for their own transition. So I would say kind of see where it is you could need some extra assistance. Like I worked with individuals where they're so just overcome with emotions that they can't really plan. So I can step in, work with a funeral home, help with the obituary, the logistics, the music, like contacting all those individuals that can help with like the ceremony and the repast. So that's where I would start. I would also say kind of reflect on your own experiences with grief and loss. Thinking back, I remember sitting vigil with my grandmother, so knowing how much that meant to her. So thinking if you were around someone that maybe didn't have the opportunity to have loved ones nearby when they were transitioning, thinking, okay, I think a death doula would be great to kind of provide that companionship and support in those final hours. And I think just using your own personal experience is something that will help you kind of decide where you might need help in the future.
One of the things that we constantly see in the aging world is it seems like everything seems really expensive. Can you give us a ballpark for what it would cost to have a death doula, maybe by the hour? I don't know. I don't even know how that sort of service is charged.
Yeah, and there isn't a standard, and unfortunately, these services aren't covered yet by insurance. So the actual cost can vary just depending on the death doula and where they are in the US or internationally. I hesitate to say like an hourly rate. When I worked with students, when it came to guiding them on how to determine pricing, it can be a little bit uncomfortable if you're charging by the hour, especially if you're offering services like sitting vigil and you're like, okay, it costs, $100 an hour to have this person sit with my mom. You don't know how long that person's going to be needed because you can't necessarily predict, the time of death. But I would always say if you are looking at hourly rate, you should be able to find a death doula kind of as low as $35 an hour. But oftentimes there is more package pricing. So for example, if I'm doing like an obituary design and write up, that might just be like $75 for the standard 4 pages, versus a legacy project, something as assembling a cookbook. I could price that at about $150 depending on the number of hours involved versus, a family session that might be a package of $200, but you get 2 sessions where that person's facilitating. So it can really depend on the individual, but I do know a lot of us offer a sliding scale because it is a sensitive area. Most of us have that heart where we want to help out whenever we can. So most times those services might be free, definitely initial consultations, or if someone, has low income, then we would just kind of base our rate on that person's ability to pay. So it can be, a tricky subject. You definitely don't want to charge a ton of money, but I do know some people who do extensive planning, like if they're researching funeral homes, if they're helping pick out caskets and things like that. I mean, packages like that can go over $1,000 or more.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where, a little bit might cost you a little, but a lot was going to cost you a lot more. And that makes a lot of sense too. And I think what we're finding is we do a lot of our research and we're talking to more people on this show is that a lot of times we've got people who are in place who do professional jobs like death doulas, like estate planners, and all of those people are there to really help people in some of their most challenging times. And I don't think we found anybody who says, oh, no, we're here to just make money. And I don't think that that's really been the case in any of these kind of professions, because I think everybody is in, especially this aging world, really to help. And a lot of times, like you, have dealt with difficult family situations that said, oh, no, this has to be better than that. So I think I'm really glad to have options like death doulas available for this, for all of us, I think.
Yeah. Are you or a loved one exploring long-term care options? Finding the right support can be overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. One call to Voice Connect Helpline, and you'll be connected with an expert who can help guide you through the process. Whether you're wondering about care levels, financing options like Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, or paying out of pocket, or you need specific recommendations that match your needs, Voice Connect is here for you. We're more than just information. We're your partner in finding the right care. You're just one call away from peace of mind. Call 314-919-2403. That's 314-919-2403.
Yeah.
And we're back. So, Maurya, I want to go back really quick and touch on something that you said. Did you say assemble a cookbook?
Oh, yes. Like when you
Please
think
talk about
of
that, because that sounds so cool.
Yes, yeah. So there's so many different types of legacy projects, and one that I'm familiar with is working with a family to assemble a cookbook. So like pulling all of grandma's favorite recipes, just something as simple as typing it into Word doc or Google Doc, and then working with Canva to make like a cool design for the front and getting that printed. Things like that are something that is a great legacy, a great reminder, and something that can be cherished by the family and something that can be passed down. So a lot of people do like making a family cookbook. Like I know of an individual who is a death doula and also used to have a catering business. So that's something that she loves to do. And she will also make family recipes. Like if that person's unable to cook and do things, she will, cook that favorite recipe. And that's something that's from the cookbook as well. So there's so many kind of different options, but that's definitely a favorite.
I love that. And it feels just to
Yeah.
me like such a great way. Like when we're talking about legacy and I'm thinking about people that really made a difference in my life, it's their food. It is some of their food.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Now I'm going to have to go home and make cheesecake.
Yep.
Mm.
100%. And I know for a lot of us, like the traditions of our families, like Thanksgiving and Christmas morning and those kinds of things, like you can just imagine if you lose the person who has always made those things. I'm thinking about my own mother. There's piles and piles of cookbooks. How do I know where these things come from, or if maybe they're just in her head? So, yeah, absolutely. Putting together something like that is really cool.
Yeah.
It would be really meaningful.
Yeah.
I know my mother has been trying to make her grandmother's fried chicken recipe, and her grandmother passed away before I was born. So let's say over 45 years, but it's probably been longer. She's been tinkering, trying to figure out what was her grandmother's fried chicken recipe. And if only this service had been there, or if only somebody had listened to my grandmother or paid enough attention to really do that.
I know.
So
Well, sometimes you just measure with your heart, and I'm
Yeah.
sure that's what Grandma was doing.
I know. My Mimi had a famous lemon meringue pie recipe that no one can recreate, and I'm just like, I know my mom has gotten close trying to make it, and just thinking of different like rituals, even if you can't get it perfect, just trying your best attempt. Sometimes there are different practices, like setting a plate for that loved one that's passed away, almost like they're there with you, and still kind of talking and speaking their name, because that's one thing that I find comforting for myself and for others, like speaking of their name, honoring their memory, and that way those, relationships bond and experiences aren't lost. So definitely, tasting a bite of that pie is like, okay, it's not like yours, Mimi, but it's still pretty good. And just having those moments is really nice.
yeah. Oh, I love that. I love these ideas. So
Yeah.
can you throw us out some other ideas of some rituals that people might want to take up after, either maybe shortly before somebody's death or maybe after somebody's died? Just
Part of
some
the
of those things
grieving
that,
process.
yeah, make people feel a little bit better.
There are a lot of great books out there and journals where you can kind of start documenting like favorite recipes, favorite things. So as that person, maybe they're aging or they're getting close to that end of life process, you can start kind of making a list of those favorite activities just to have that in advance. Like I mentioned, setting a plate for that person. Some rituals are setting a cup of tea, like in the morning, where you can kind of just start your day with that person in mind. Others are going on just a walk, like a silent walk where you have those thoughts, you're thinking about those best memories and the times. And not often time we have complete silence and solitude. So just having that space of peace is super comforting. I also like kind of just collecting little reminders, like maybe you see a butterfly pen or, a bookmark that has the person's favorite place to visit. Collecting those in a memory box is a really cool idea as well. I know some individuals that, a certain time of day, they might just do a toast, a little cheers to that person, letting them know that, they're on their mind. I think that's something cool as well. Writing letters is huge, and sometimes it can kind of bring up a lot of emotions, like a goodbye letter, just saying on a piece of paper, like, I'm so grateful you taught me this. I remember when XYZ happened. And then there are ways to kind of dig a little deeper, and you don't have to share it with anyone. And especially if that person has transition, is kind of just therapeutic. But you can write on there like, "I forgive you for this," or "I hope that you forgave me for XYZ." And it can be lighthearted, like, "I hope you forgave me when I broke this plate or this expensive china," or something like that. Or just saying, "I forgive you maybe for not being around as much, working so many hours." So things like that can be helpful as well. And also in certain caskets, they have like a little box where you can put the letters. And that's something that a lot of people take advantage of, kind of writing that note to that loved one who transitioned and then kind of bearing that with them. Other things like, thinking this day and age, social media. Different social media platforms have the possibility of like turning your page into like a memorial page, and you can actually kind of designate someone to take over that page. So you might, post on anniversaries like birthdays or special days of that loved one, posting on their page. That's a cool kind of ritual as well. I'm trying to think, there's just so many, like I said, making, whether it's a cookbook or bracelets, even song and poetry is super therapeutic. Artwork. I know I lead some sessions on like creatively coping with loss, where we're coloring, we're writing song lyrics and poetry or dance moves. I did a workshop where someone was doing interpretive dance, like, dancing out the terms loss and grief and mourning. So even using arts like dance can be helpful as well. There's just so many different things. And then just think about, the traditions you had with that loved one, whether it was visiting, the park on a birthday or going to their favorite restaurant. All of those things can be part of a ritual that you create.
I absolutely love that. On my boyfriend's family, we have a tradition where on the person's death day and a person's birthday, we have a little something that they liked. So for one of his sisters, it's an RC cola. It has to be RC cola. And
Aw.
for his dad, it's a Little Debbie stack cake. So it's a really nice way to remember somebody,
Hmm.
but in a way that doesn't take up all the space of a day.
Right.
Which can be really challenging for people sometimes too. Is how do you remember folks?
Yeah,
Yeah.
my great grandma passed away when she was 108,
Oh,
and
wow.
she said that the thing that kept her going that long is coffee, because she would brew a full pot in the morning, and throughout the day she'd drink the whole thing, and she did that for decades, literally. And so the first time I visited her grave, I brought a little to-go cup of coffee and set it down
Oh.
for her. Figured she could use a cup, so.
Hmm. Oh, that's so sweet.
So we've moved into more grief than that the before the ritual. But
Right.
how has
Hmm.
this line of work really changed your perspective on death and the dying process?
Man. I feel like it has changed me a lot. I feel like I was more definitely reactive, kind of going through that personally growing up. But in this line of work, you really have to get comfortable with your own mortality. Like, if you're asking clients to start documenting their wishes and things like that, it's always good practice. I would tell students to kind of go through the exercises yourself. So I've had to, write my obituary. I've had to plan like what songs I want, like what I want the repast to look like. I've had to kind of just have these conversations with myself. And just, I feel like it's given me definitely more appreciation for life. A lot of people are fearful. Some traditions think if you mention death and dying, that's going to speed up the process and things like that. But it's just so helpful to talk about it out loud because it is an experience that all of us will share. We never know the moment or the time, and that's something that I've definitely learned growing up. And with society, who knows what could happen? We have so many tragic losses, but this has just taught me to love on those around me, make sure that I am always thinking about my own legacy and how I want to be remembered. But it's definitely made me a more compassionate person because I just hope my work will not only help people plan and feel prepared for the end of life, but I just really want everyone to kind of get to that final moment and smile and feel like, they lived a good life, that they were able to accomplish so much. And if they weren't able to get certain things done, that it's fine because they still made that great impact. And so that's why I do the work that I do, because I just never want anyone to like have that regret. And I think that's something that stays with me because I've seen a lot of people struggle at the end, have a lot of anger, have a lot of regret. And so I'm thinking if I teach people, if I normalize these conversations early enough, when they get to that point, they'll know that it was okay and that they made a good impact.
It feels like it's such a healthy perspective on death to kind of accept that it's in some level without getting too morbid. So here at Voice, we can get a little morbid.
We can sometimes,
so,
but death is ultimately just a part of life. And so I think that's a very important perspective to have. And I think utilizing a death doula could absolutely help people to have that perspective.
Absolutely. Well, Maurya, is there any last things that you want people to know about and the whole world of death doulas?
I would just say, just Google. There's so many great pages to follow, look up. I know some companies are thinking about including like death doula as a benefit, just starting to normalize grief and just seeing the statistics of caregiving in the future. But not to be afraid to ask. Like if you have these questions, if you want to plan and maybe you can't talk to those around you, just to reach out, whether it's on social media like LinkedIn or Facebook, but just to really think about what it is that you want. Because at the end of the day, you want to go out on your own terms with your own wishes and making sure that that's documented. So even if it's not like a full-on consultation or plan with a death doula, just if you have a journal, if you have it in your notes, even if you send an email to yourself, just documenting your wishes. I would say also just start documenting your memories and milestones. Sometimes that can be so therapeutic. We get caught up in the day-to-day and life stresses us out. But if we really reflect on our life and some highlights, I think it's great to kind of save that in a folder and just to go back, because when those times gets hard or when you get to that end and that point of transition, you have something to reflect back on, and hopefully that will bring you a smile. So I would just say reach out, don't be afraid to ask questions, and just slow down enough to kind of document your memories and milestones.
Awesome advice. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've appreciated having you. I appreciate so much your involvement with Voice over the years. And
Yes,
I hope we
always.
get to see you very, very soon.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for discussing this topic and not being afraid to have those difficult conversations.
Absolutely. Well, after all, we are at the age where somebody in our life is going to need a death doula soon. So thanks a lot.
Yes.
Thank you, Maurya.
Thanks.
Did you like what you heard today? Do you have thoughts to share or insight on this topic? We'd love to hear it. Visit voicestl.org/podcast and click the survey link to give your feedback.